Good evening and welcome to the April 5th, 2022 Gilman Central School District Board of Education meeting. Would you all please silence your cell phones and stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so this is the Board of Ed budget workshop, and so we have no public comment tonight, and I see we have one item on our agenda, which is the budget development, and so I will turn it over to Dr. Wiles and Neil Sanders. Do you have a presentation?
Well, actually, there's two parts to our budget conversation tonight. There's the part where we'll address the operating budget for 22-23, but then we also thought it would be helpful to give you a bit of an update on where we are with our federal funding. So we're going to start with the regular budget and then move to the presentation. And so you have in front of you the traditional Board of Ed budget workshop worksheet that we put together each year. And Neil, I'm going to put you on the spot here to walk through it since you put it together.
Okay. Thank you. So again, this is one that you've seen in the past. We outline all of the aspects of the budget increase, tax levy increase, and so on and so forth. In addition, we have areas that we can make adjustments for both revenue and expenditures. So the only change that we've made so far to the budget that was released previously is to be able to add a 0.2 FTE for the Altamont librarian. We discussed this at our last meeting. We're able to do that by finding what we call salary breakage. So whenever we have a retirement or a resignation, typically the person that replaces them is at a lower salary, and that creates breakage. So we have budgeted a higher salary, we hire somebody, they come in at a lower salary, and the difference between those two amounts is what we call salary breakage. So going back through the budget, basically from when we put it together till now, and looking for areas where we might have had that occur, we were able to identify 5 particular areas. So we have district office clerical, Westmere clerical, Farnsworth Middle School and Guilderland High School clerical, and then custodial salaries as well. So those were the areas where we had some employee movement, resulted in some savings. Again, savings are approximate because we don't know exactly where people are going to come in, typically lower, but how much lower, and also depending on the person that's leaving, where they are on the salary schedule, so we have varying amounts, but feel comfortable in being able to present this and offset that increase of $13,000 with those other amounts in terms of salary breakage.
So I just want to confirm, Neil, so the Altamont Elementary Librarian, so we can change it from a 0.6 to a 0.8, and this is the regular operating budget, so
Correct.
We should be able to hopefully sustain that because it's not coming from the federal funds.
Right. And this is cost neutral, as I indicated,
Yeah.
so no impact on the budget whatsoever.
That's great. You were able to listen to the community and put that in.
Yeah, it was an important thing to do for sure. So thank you to however it worked out. That's great.
I have one more question. And besides this, Neil, I know that at least before the weekend, the state budget wasn't adopted yet. And so, but at that point, there was nothing in for education. And is that the same? There's nothing changing?
Yes, we have not gotten any updates on the state budget passage at this point. The good thing is that the issues in play are not around education funding. Lots of policy type issues are getting intertwined with the budget. So that seems to be where most of the discussion is taking place at this point. And the economic proposals, again, haven't been tied to education. So I would say we're optimistic that the funding that was in the governor's budget will hold true once the legislature adopts the budget. We don't know that for sure, though. So it's a wait and see until the final state budget is adopted. But again, no indicators, either at the end of last week or the beginning of this week, that education funding is in jeopardy at this point.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if that were If they were to reduce the amount that they give us, what does that do to everything else? Do we have to try and find money, or do, you know?
Well, it's a reexamination of the budget, so the big question is how much?
Yeah.
And then what options do we have? So we've been through this exercise before where we have a preliminary budget, and then, legislature adopts the budget somewhat different, and then we have to make adjustments. So really would need to see what the gap is, and then that would dictate what steps we might take to address that. But again, right now, we're hopeful that education aid will remain untouched in this final legislative process, and we'll get the money that the governor has indicated we would be getting.
Okay, if we get less, we still have the same, like, tax cap limit and all of that, so it
Yeah.
really falls on us if they take money away from what they've said we're going to get.
Yes. There would have to be some adjustments in the budget in order to balance the budget.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We're hopeful that the budget is done by the time the board has to adopt this budget a week from tonight. So we're hopeful. But some of us who have been doing this for a long time can remember years when the state budget wasn't passed until August.
That's what I was going to say. Wasn't there at least one year when it was?
Many years. where-
Okay, I probably haven't been doing quite as long as you have, but I do remember it. Yeah,
It's a little nerve-wracking.
yes, okay, thank you.
Somebody, I think, has raised their hand online. Oh, Barbara? Go ahead, Barbara.
I just had a quick question. We received a letter today from a Spanish teacher, Lisa Osterhof, and I'm wondering if it's possible to share if federal funds will be used to maintain that lab that seems to be such a positive experience for kids, or however you want to discuss the issue.
I didn't see the letter. I think it came in shortly before the board meeting. Are they talking about academic intervention services for Spanish? Is that what the question is about?
Yeah, they're talking about class size in Spanish class and inclusive
Good.
learning experience.
Could SEMA maybe read the letter so that, we could be aware a little bit?
I'm not sure if it was public comment.
She just wrote an email. She didn't say public comment, so I don't want to put it out there. She
I
did
can
public
speak to
comment.
class size and our thinking around AIS for world languages, at least partially, and then we can do some more homework going forward. I know there was some discussion around our lowering of class sizes at the middle school early on in the budget process, and we are only able to do that in 8th grade. And I don't expect anyone to remember all the slides from our 50-slide presentation, but in the slide where we talked about class size reduction, there were FTEs to cover the core areas plus all the on-core areas, but there was not FTEs associated with world language because we did the class size analysis. Remember, class size in our world languages is based on which language students take, and how the sections break out. So Mr. Obie, who works with Mr. Laster to put the schedule together, did an analysis of our class sizes in world languages, and they were in Spanish in particular. And I can't speak to French off the top of my head, but in Spanish, in the neighborhood of 24, 25 students per class, which is consistent to where we will land once we lower the other class sizes in world language. So there are no FTEs included for class size reduction. And I'll just mention Italian, because we have so many students interested in taking Italian and so few Italian teachers, that we can't lower class size there. We cap it at 30, and we always have to turn some students away because we only have so many spots in the classroom. Now, having said all of that, this year we have funded through federal funds. We are providing some extra assistance to students in foreign world languages, and we are looking toward continuing that into next year, but I'm saying this preliminarily because we're not quite there yet. So I'm making some assumptions about what the writer was getting at and covering all the things I know about world language right now. Mr. Laster is shaking his head, so I think I got it right. Thank you, Mr. Laster.
Thanks, Dr. Wiles. I think someone else maybe raised their hand. Is that Kim?
It's me.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Just kind of continuing off of what Barb was saying, I'm actually reading the same email that she was speaking about, and it says that the funds were used to pilot a lab co-teaching position, and it's 1.3 FTE offered for co-teaching. Now, I know just from what I had my son in the building, this is something that the World Languages group has been asking for a long time, for co-teaching and help with that, because I know the core classes have it. However, the specials, things like that, have not. And I guess now my concern looking at this and during the budget process, hearing everyone say, well, the federal funds aren't permanent, it's a one and done type thing, I now have grave concerns that this is going to go away when this is something that was greatly needed.
Well, anything funded by federal dollars is finite as an item being funded through federal dollars. So anything that would continue beyond those would need to be transferred over to the general operating budget eventually. So I can't make any promises beyond 2024.
Wow. That's not happy about that.
For now, it's in there, right? Because is it included in the federal budget?
Yes, what she's saying, so, with federal dollars, there's a sunset with that money, so.
Sure.
But, it's just like any other, I guess, home budget. If we put money in for that, we'd have to take it out of somewhere else, and.
But
right
these
now-
are special education students, and these special education teachers and the world language teachers have been asking for a while for this help, because when a student goes into the middle school and they get, it's my understanding, they get 2 years of the language where it can count towards a high school credit. Sometimes, not often, a child can opt out of it and get another credit in its place, but this is a special education support. So I understand that it's a federal funding, but we're giving this group support, and then because it's federal funding, I understand that it goes away. I think this needs to be a priority also moving forward. It just bothers me that it's like, okay, well, we gave them the help now with special education, we could yank it. So I think we need to keep that in mind in coming years.
I'm going to be honest, Kim, that's not what I'm hearing. I mean, I'm hearing we put the money up, and I completely understand your position and your emotion, and the emotion you feel behind it, but we can't make a decision now for 2025. The budget's going to be different. We had a lot of money that we thought we were going to have that we could do a lot of different things with, that we lost, unfortunately, because of a need, the district need.
And Nate, I totally agree with you and understand. I guess it's just because throughout this process, we've heard so many times that the federal funds they're not permanent. So I guess just based off of that, that's where I wouldn't necessarily say emotion. Maybe it's more of me not feeling well coming through, but yeah, that's where my concern is.
No, I understand. I just think, it's like Seema just said, anything we add, we got to take away. And right now, we're talking, that's there. It's in the budget. We have the money for it. It's in federal funded budget. We have the money for it. I think we need to really focus on what we have now and what we are limited with right now. And it's, and hopefully in a year, next year it'll be different. The year after that it'll be different. And maybe we have more, maybe we have less. But it's in there now, and I agree. I think it's an important thing to have. I don't disagree with that at all.
Seema?
Oh, go ahead, Barb, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to reiterate, I'm glad to hear that this position will be covered with federal funds for this coming year, but I agree with Kim that, as we look ahead, Having 28 students in a foreign language class, many of whom have special needs, is an extraordinary task for a teacher. And we apparently have had a very successful program using these federal funds. So as we look into the future and next year's budget, or however long these funds last, I do hope that we really take a serious look at this, because I think it's very important.
I think we're all agreed.
Yeah, I think we all probably agree that it's a point that we have to reconsider, looking at, next year's budget, or whenever there is some more, there's some more wiggle room with the regular operating budget. I'm glad we were able to get this librarian position up, though. It seems like that was something we could add, and it, costs a lot less than the classroom size bubble that seems to cost a lot just for the 8th grade. And I know we couldn't do it for the 6th, though a little, the little money that we do have, at least we could have made a difference here. And I don't really see that there's much more that we have any wiggle room with, especially knowing that the state budget hasn't been adopted yet. Which to me is crazy, which I don't know if everybody knows that. We're making a budget based on, we don't even know the actual numbers yet. The whole system is insane. Sorry.
Seems like a
Just
conversation
venting.
for next year, because we can't fund it. It's funded. If I understand this email correctly, right, we're good for this year, move the discussion forward to next year if the funding goes away. Does that sound like the right?
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for addressing that. I didn't get to fully read. I know it was sent just an hour before, so I just saw it quickly before I drove. But thank you for highlighting the pieces that they had written about in the email. I'll definitely keep it in mind. Do we have other questions on because you said you have the federal funds presentation. Neil, so anybody else have questions on this first part, the operating budget? No? Okay, so we can move on, I think. Thanks, Kim and Barb. And you can speak up if I don't hear the hand thing, because I've heard it a couple times and then I didn't hear it.
You weren't tuned into that
What, the hand
little
raise?
hand thing.
Well, I could hear it the first couple times, but then I didn't hear it.
Well, good evening. We kind of jump-started this conversation here a couple of minutes ago, talking about federal funds. So Dr. Wiles and I will be sharing a presentation this evening to provide an update on where we are with federal funds, kind of looking at where we are currently and still what's remaining in the years ahead. So with that, my screen changed. I need your help, Regan. I don't know what happened to... That's the wrong mouse. Oh, it's just stuck in front of... Where is it? There we go. Yeah. Can I do it that way? No, I can't do it that way. Sorry, my mouse is not cooperating at the moment. It's hidden behind the screen.
So there's stipends for that.
This one here?
There we go. Good. Thank you, sir. All right, I got my technical support assistant to help me out here, so I appreciate your patience while we reloaded the PowerPoint presentation. So the first thing we want to talk about, and this is a conversation that we're just engaged in, is a little bit about the allocations. And there are two components to the federal money, and this is the first component. This is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as CRRSA. So the district's allocation for CRRSA funds is $4,995,000. And it covers a time period, and both of these cover 2 different time periods, so it's important to know the difference. So this will fund cost incurred from March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2023. And I'll also point out there's a difference in the purposes between the 2 that we'll talk about. So this is based on preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19. So this is living in the moment with COVID-19, and then what do we need to do to prevent, prepare, and respond to it? So that's the focus of this particular money. So the outcomes that the allocation is supposed to be used for is to offer the opportunity to make educational systems better for students, educators, staff, schools, and their communities post-pandemic, to address the impact of lost instructional time from the pandemic on all students, and that's a key factor, lost instructional time, and to address any pre-existing challenges that, if we had left them unaddressed, would impede recovery from the pandemic. So this is all about it being in the midst of the pandemic and responding to it, and the money, how it should be utilized in that scenario. The other allocation is known as the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, at $2.8 million. This is for costs incurred from March 13th, 2020, same starting point, but it goes another year. It goes to September 30th of 2024. So this is about safely reopening and sustaining the safe operation of schools. So it's kind of post-pandemic as opposed to being in the midst of the pandemic, and really addressing the impact of the virus on the nation's students. So the outcomes that are applied to this allocation: reopening schools safely and sustaining their safe operation. So we're in the midst of reopening and sustaining. Addressing students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs resulting from the pandemic. And in terms of the use of funds, schools such as ours must reserve at least 20% of the funds to address learning loss, and it needs to be done through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And a second piece to this, address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. So there's really 2 parts to that particular use of funds: the 20% to address learning loss, and also to address disproportionate impact on underrepresented student subgroups. We got into this conversation just a few minutes ago, but it's a very important concept that these federal funds represent a one-time infusion of cash, and it's to address specific short-term needs resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. So one-time, short-term, so it's not intended to do anything more other than exist for a short period of time, helping us through the pandemic, and then it's intended to go away. So that's why we need to be very, very careful how we manage that. So if we do not manage that well, and this is part of the conversation we're just having, we could be left in a difficult and precarious financial position when these funds are exhausted. So if we plan for them and use them, but don't have a way to find another way to cover those costs after the funding ends, we are going to be in a difficult position. That's why we should never use these funds to offset reoccurring costs. So if we have reoccurring costs, we use the funding for that. The funding goes away, then we have a difficult decision. Do we have other funding to replace it? If not, we have to start making cuts and reductions in order to do that. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wiles.
Show me how to advance the slide here.
Okay.
Is it just down here? Oh,
down,
okay. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. We wanted to just kind of capture a snapshot of what we have been doing so far with the federal funds available to us. So the areas of support that I'll be sharing and Neil will be picking up on are things we're doing this year, so the 21-22 school year, many of which we will be looking to continue into 22-23 as we continue to fine-tune the needs of our students. So some of the instructional personnel that are currently being supported through federal funds this school year include a number of teachers who are providing additional services, and they come in a variety of forms. So we have some special education teachers under this umbrella. We have AIS teachers, so academic intervention services teachers under this. We have related service providers as well. And there's actually even a piece of a music teacher in here to help us address some extra sections. So the whole idea here is, as the year has unfolded, we have identified needs that students have, and we've been able to leverage the federal funds in order to support them. In addition to that, we have some additional special education teaching assistants. These ladies are connected to a third self-contained classroom over in Altamont. Our numbers in the fall were much higher with a group of students who had some significant needs. So we were able to create that classroom and staff it appropriately. That classroom is one that we are carrying forward using federal funds into the new school year. You see a counselor listed there as well. We have a counselor who was originally planned to be here for half a year to fill in a leave. But because we had these resources, when the person she was filling in for came back, we were able to have her stay with us and be able to provide additional counseling support in our elementary buildings. We also have, this gets to the safe reopening of schools question. We struggled in the beginning of the year with the notion of having 3 feet of social distancing in our cafeterias. You'll remember last year we didn't use our cafeterias at all. So in order to reduce the level, the number of students in the cafeteria at any one time, we offered teachers the opportunity, elementary teachers, to have lunch with their students in their classroom, thereby giving up their duty-free lunch. And so we compensated those teachers for that. And then the FMS end-of-day homeroom coverage is really a function of the 13 minutes, 15 minutes at the end of the school day, the difference between when our walkers and our students who are picked up by their parents are dismissed at 3:31, 14 minutes, I'll get it right, and the 3:45 dismissal when our buses can actually arrive at Farnsworth. And so we are paying the teachers who have that additional 14 minutes of supervision each and every day. We've also used $74,000 of this toward tutoring. These are for students who, for whatever reason, could not be in school and required additional support. We're supporting our PM school, which is a very, very busy place this year. You know, typically our PM school is for students who are not in school, sometimes because of a disciplinary issue, sometimes for a health reason, but it's been very busy this year. And then to get our Positivity Project off the ground this year, we are supporting teacher leaders in that area to help support its implementation in each of the buildings, K-5 and the middle school as well. And then we're also planning on supporting some summer curriculum work. In addition, you know, we've talked many times about the workload of our nurses during the pandemic, and that's reflected a lot here on this slide. We were able to hire a floating nurse. This is an individual who does exactly that, can go around the district to where we have the most need on any given day, and it's been a tremendous help to us, especially at the height of the transmission right after the first of the year. So that was a good thing to be able to do. We also have some additional teacher aides who we funded through this program, and then we were also able to recognize the many additional COVID-related duties that our nurses took on during the pandemic and have that additional compensation. Under the category of purchase services, which is the label within the grant, we have also built in some professional development. And again, these are all topics related to our recognition of building the expertise and our skills of our teachers to support our students. These are all topics that we have been working on in recent years: literacy lessons, reading interventions, reading recovery, reading assessment, design, and diagnostics. So we've built in some funds to support that professional development. And then lastly, we actually have a smaller federal grant that's targeted just for our homeless population that is a little over $7,000, and we've been able to allocate that toward transportation of those students. And then I think lastly for me, one of the things, and you'll have noticed, is that because of COVID, we have a lot more communication to do with our families. For months now, we've been doing twice weekly communication out to our families to keep people aware of the cases that we have in each of our buildings or other timely topics or actions or activities that they need to be aware of. So we have expanded our communication services through BOCES. So we actually have a person here 4 days a week, another individual for 1 day a week, and then we have some assistance with our visual media, social media platforms, which has been really, really helpful during this time. So all of these things, and I think I turn it back to Mr. Sanders right now, all of these things are addressing immediate current needs that we're living through right now. And again, we're open for conversation about which of these make sense to carry forward and which may not. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mr. Sanders.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up with more of our categories where we have expenses that we plan to utilize these federal funds for. So under the category of equipment and supplies, we're looking at providing more classroom books, some additional Chromebooks, musical instruments, musician mask and the instrument covers that go along with those, a wood planer for the high school technology department, weight room equipment, and calculators for the high school math classes. So a lot of these items here are engaging students, and that's what we want to. So between music and high school technology and the weight room, calculators that are more advanced and we need in our classes, so in the book. So we want to engage students, and we have the opportunity to make sure that we're engaging students by use of these federal funds, and also upgrading some of our equipment, materials, and supplies to be able to do that. Under the category of remodeling and repairs, we do have capital project work going on, and we also talked about part of these funds being used for capital project work, which is eligible under the requirements. So what we have targeted so far, repair and upgrade to our HVAC systems, $350,000, and then outdoor learning spaces, $420,000. And these would be pavilions at each of our schools that would create a great outdoor learning space for students. What I have is an asterisk next to outdoor learning spaces, the amount there, $420,000. We don't know how this money is going to play out over multiple years. But what we do have is we have some ability to utilize more money for this construction type work. So it's eligible to be reimbursed. We have targeted the use of federal funds in our last capital bond proposition. But we also don't know exactly at this point over the next couple of years how our student needs, what they're going to be, how much we're going to have to spend to be able to meet those needs. So we do have some room if we don't have needs that consume all of our money to be able to increase that amount and lower the borrowing costs for the construction of those spaces. So just something to keep in mind, and we would know that when we're coming into 2024, so we would have the opportunity to adjust our borrowing if need be, based on where we are with federal funds, what our needs are, how much is remaining at that time. So we've still got a couple years to go. We haven't met all of our needs yet, or understand all of our needs necessarily. So we're coming tonight to talk to you about what we have committed to so far and where we still have a little room to move if needed as well. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Judy.
How much of the federal dollars does this encompass?
It's about a little less than 1.6 million
Out
out of 7.8 million.
Okay.
So there's still a good margin left in those funds, but we're being very pragmatic about our use of those funds, assessing, identifying needs, and then applying funding where appropriate.
Thank you.
Nate?
These funds, and especially the ones where we're talking about the teacher, assisting the teacher, whatever that category was, just so I understand, that money, and we're looking at this big line item budget, how is that reflected in the budget? Is that separate from, or is it included in these numbers?
The teaching assistants, are you talking about?
I'm talking about teachers to provide additional services, that $500,000.
Yeah.
and really what I'm getting at is what Kim was talking about earlier, those FTEs, those special assistants, is that part, would that be part of that?
It's part of this, not part of the budget.
Okay.
So these are all,
Okay.
Yeah.
So my request as we move forward is if, so that we can, when we start talking about carrying it forward, is incorporating that into this budget so that we see where we're going to have to really think about where we're going to have to carry it forward. I understand it's not part of the budget, but we need to know years from now, next year when we're looking at it, what we got to start planning.
well, the idea here too, and I'll let Dr. Weil speak to this if I'm off base on it. The goal behind this funding is that we're going to address the needs of kids over the next couple of years and get them back on track. So that's the additional support services that we're talking about, interventions, those sorts of things. So the money, there's an end game to the money, the idea being that we will get students back to normal, we'll help them get through the pandemic, recover from it. Our schools reopen, back to business as normal, getting kids back on track again. And that's when that funding goes away. So now we're back to our normal operating budget and being able to serve our students with that source of funding. So it's an interim gap type of arrangement. But you're right.
Yeah,
If there are,
my concern is more about those positions like the assistants at the World Learning, where that might be something that we would probably want to keep using going forward, so that we, including that in here so we understand, look, next year, this is included because it's federal funds, but next year, this is going to have to go in the general operating budget. This is where this is going to go, and this is what we've been using it from, so that we know, well, that's an item we got to make sure we think about.
yep, understood. Seema?
I just have a question. I know, well, it seems like years ago, but I feel like months ago we talked about the air conditioning, like making sure FMS, et cetera. So is the line item here for that, does that include all of what we talked about early in the year, making sure that, I think it was, there would be some window units. If we're including window units, then FMS would be fully,
Yes.
have AC.
Yep. So this is another funding source for that work that's really across the district. So part of that will be done through our capital construction project funding, and then part of that can also be done through these federal funds. So it gives us another opportunity to address more work of the same kind that we're doing with capital project funds or offsetting the borrowing costs. So we have some flexibility in that regard.
And then the transportation services for homeless students, I guess I don't understand why that falls under federal funds, and because we would have to do that, correct?
Right, but it's a temporary situation
Okay.
that we're dealing with, so those situations are not long-term in
changed.
terms of a homeless student.
Okay. That's all I had for right now. Thanks.
Question.
Yes, Kelly?
When does development start to look at the next year's allocations for these? Because I'd really like to see more counselors involved in here, because that's a COVID-related item that's like a no-brainer that students need now, and understanding it's going to go away, but we could utilize counselors now to address the issues that are going on, knowing that it might not end up in the budget moving forward, but they still need it, and it seems like it's a no-brainer for the COVID money. Is there a time that we can discuss looking at that for the future?
So we're actually looking at next year now.
Yeah, okay.
We have a working list of needs that are emerging, and as the year has unfolded, it's really become clear exactly where we might need to provide some additional supports for our students. So counselors are on that list, AIS teachers are on that list, ENL teachers are on that list, reading teachers are on that list. So there's a working, kind of a working plan to see what makes the most sense for next year. It's important to note that, we're right now, we're getting our benchmark data on our students and their reading. They're taking state assessments right now. We're really getting a handle on what is the distance we need to close, and how best do we do that. That's what we're working on right now.
Thank you.
Does that list, Dr. Wiles, include things like, for example, the equipment piece that are I guess, non-consumable things. Are there things on there that are also kind of non-consumable, so they last?
We actually asked our leadership team to put together a list of the materials, supplies, equipment that we often say there's just no way we can buy that because it's expensive or whatever. So the list that you see that Neil shared really is a good representation of what has been requested and what we've actually been able to get. Because supply chain issues have slowed us down here a little bit. So I'm going to guess that there'll be additional materials and supplies that will become available over time.
Okay. Great, thank you. Is it Barb?
Somebody's putting.
Sorry, Barb,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I just have a quick question. Is it possible to sort of give us a more clear picture rather than everything being sort of lumped? These are the AIS teachers, a more detailed description of how we use the money, like in what classroom, that type of thing. And how much of these federal funds are left for next year? And I think, does it go through the third year as well?
It does, and the short answer is yes, Barbara. We eventually will be able to do that. This funding has come in several buckets over several, we've been made aware of it over time. The applications for submitting them have come and gone with rules changing midstream. So it has been a real ball of yarn, I guess, or several balls of yarn, all tangled up together to try to make sense of how best to use this money, following the rules, meeting the timelines, making sure we're doing a good job assessing student needs. So I think what we have done this year in 21, 22 is try to not lose a year in accessing these funds and respond to needs that are immediate before us. And then take stock of what's left, and then what are the most pressing needs that we can fulfill over the next 2 years in ways that won't necessarily create a strain on the operating budget on the other side of all of this. So our dear friend Lynn Wells, who's watching on TV tonight, who will probably yell at me tomorrow for mentioning her name, she is helping us unravel this, the convoluted funding streams and making sure that we have a good handle on what we have, where it is, and then what we want to do next. So we can put something like that together for you down the road. We wanted tonight really just to give you a snapshot, kind of a 30,000-foot view of where we are with federal funds, because we haven't talked about it in a ton of detail, but there will be more detail in the coming days. Blanca, then Rebecca.
Okay. So first of all, is there a committee that's deciding how the federal funds are being used, or is it really just administrators?
Well, we started way back when with a thought exchange where we asked our community, how do you think we should use our federal dollars? Okay. But they're supposed to be driven by need. So the needs are defined really by the data that we gather on our students, which is work done by our teachers and our other professional staff in the buildings who are identifying, here's where we have some needs, and our administrative team then sends that our way, and we work through it that way.
Okay. And recognizing I think I'm the only one who is in favor of a school resource officer, I just ask that you keep that on your radar, because to me, I read on page 3, outcomes: reopening schools safely and sustaining their safe operation, addressing students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs resulting from the pandemic. And I think about how I feel like we have a deficit at the middle school because our SRO is so busy at the high school. So again, I know there are competing priorities. I get that there's no wiggle room in the regular budget, but if we could keep that on our radar, I think that would be good.
Rebecca?
I was just wondering about pre-K. Does pre-K fall under this?
That's another bucket. So we have seen on our initial aid run that our pre-K funding should be the same as it was last year. But of course, without the budget being done, we're kind of in a, we'd love for that to be done. We, just so everyone's up, if they don't recall, we did issue our RFP. We do have some responses. We're in the process of evaluating those responses. But until the budget is done and we know that that funding is actually coming our way, we want to just hold off on that. But that's a separate funding stream.
And not part of the operational budget? So
Not part of that.
At this point?
At this point, we've been funded for 2 years, promised 2 years, the year we're in and the one ahead of us. I presume it will continue. It probably won't grow, though. That's the challenge of it. The costs go up, but the grant funding is flat. I have colleagues who've been getting the same amount of pre-K funding for 15 years.
Thank you. I just have one more question about the start time. I know that you're still meeting and talking about start time. Do you anticipate that it'll be cost neutral?
We went into the project saying cost neutral. So, because the reality is, even if we wanted to add runs, there's such a driver shortage that we would not be able to make it happen. So just to let everyone know where we are with that, the committee task force has been meeting on Thursdays for the last few weeks. We're meeting again this Thursday. And we've been talking a lot about the challenges and the pros and the cons of what we have and what we had and what we hope to have. The plan on Thursday is to provide a number of scenarios that will work from a transportation perspective. You know, and then what are the pros and what are the cons? And then it's going to be a matter, and none of them are perfect. That, in case there was anyone hoping for perfection, I'm sorry to say there won't be. And then it's going to be a matter of which pros outweigh which cons as we pick between the models. But we're hoping to get closer to that soon.
Thank you. Someone else? Oh, Kim, go ahead. Thanks. Again.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Just kind of going over the federal funds here, it's kind of bringing to mind something from our last meeting. We had Carrie Deneen come and speak about the second grade going into third grade. Shh, okay, go ahead, sorry. Our second grade, you heard that. Second to third grade, where there are concerns about the class sizes. And I just wanted to reiterate that as well. This is the same group that started kindergarten during COVID, was on a screen in COVID, has not really had a full year of just what we would call typical. And next year, I'm really concerned about that class size for third grade. And I understand that it falls within the parameters of where class sizes should be. But just as we're talking about learning loss and things like that, I think we really need to make sure we take a look at that.
Kim, we do have 4 unassigned built into the regular operating budget. And we typically use those to address class size issues at the elementary. Now, whether or not, I'm not saying that's a guaranteed thing, but that's what we use it for. That's what they're there for largely. So we will be monitoring all those class sizes as we work through the spring a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, I know I've asked this before, could you tell us again the class size that we're looking at? Not that we're looking at, but that, our recommendations are.
I can give you the ranges.
Yeah.
I don't remember the class size for second grade off the top of my head, but 18 to 23 for K2 and 21 to 25 for 3-5.
Okay, thank you.
Blanca?
Along the same lines, how much of a reduction are we looking at? I know in the budget we're looking at 8th grade, right? So how much of a difference will there be?
In class size at 8th grade? I think it's about 4 students per class.
Okay.
I don't have it right in front of me, though.
Okay.
it brings it within reason. Any other questions on the federal funds thus far? We'll be talking about these for years.
Fun times.
I have one quick one, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I apologize, we've probably discussed this before. Is that where the money for the Positivity Project is coming from, the federal funds?
We are funding the Positivity Project through BOCES, but we do have,
Okay.
we have teacher leaders who have been helping us get it off the ground this year, and those stipends are in our federal funds.
Okay, so BOCES is covering the cost for the project itself, and then we're just paying for the stipends.
Well, we pay BOCES for the service and then get aid back on it. It'd be nice if we could work that out.
Yeah, that's, okay.
So there is a fee through BOCES. We pay the fee. The following year, we get about 55% of the cost
Okay.
back as revenue.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, and that's the last item on our agenda. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, issues? I know it's not an item on the agenda, but I just put it out there. No? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn? Oh,
So I'd like to thank the board and the district office administration for being so responsive to the student, staff, and community members at Altamont with your adjustment to the library position. I think you made a decision that will make a difference in the lives of children, and I appreciate it. And along those same vein, I appreciate the work that all of you are doing as volunteers and grappling with problems whose solutions have very well-meaning competing interests. So we appreciate it. You make a difference in the lives of kids. Thanks.
thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I'm also-
admin, for
Can I
coming.
just say, too, I'm very pleased that we could get the Altamont. It brings a level of fairness, I think, if nothing else. And I mean, obviously, it brings more than that, but I was so glad to see that was in the adjustment.
Me too. I feel like we're tackling the equity issue, and I feel really good about that.
Great, okay. Well, thanks for admin for coming to be able to answer any questions. And if nobody else has any other questions or comments, I have a motion to adjourn. Blanca, second. Kelly. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.